boats were dazzle painted to aid identification in combat. Felix Stowe F-5L under construction at the Naval Aircraft Factory, Philadelphia, circa 1920. The Curtiss Aeroplane and Motor Company independently developed its designs into the small Model F, the larger Model K, several of which were sold to the Russian Naval Air Service, and the Model C for the U.S. Navy. Curtiss, among others, also built the Felix Stowe F.5 as the Curtiss F-5L, based on the final porthull designs and powered by American Liberty engines. Meanwhile, the pioneering flying boat designs of François Denhor had been steadily developed by the Franco-British Aviation Company into a range of practical craft. Smaller than the Felix Stowes, several thousand FBAs served with almost all of the Allied forces as reconnaissance craft, patrolling the North Sea, Atlantic and Mediterranean Oceans. In Italy, several flying boats were developed, starting with the L series, and progressing with the M series. The Macchi M.5 in particular was extremely maneuverable and agile and matched the land-based aircraft it had to fight. 244 were built in total. Towards the end of the First World War, the aircraft were flown by the Italian Navy Aviation, the United States Navy and United States Marine Corps Airmen. Ensign Charles Hamann won the first Medal of Honor awarded to a United States naval aviator in an M.5. The Aeromarine Plane and Motor Company modified the Felix Stowe F.5 into Aeromarine 75 airliner flying boats, which with Aeromarine West Indies Airways flew airmail to Florida, Bahamas, and Cuba, along with being passenger carriers. The German aircraft manufacturing company Hansa Brandenburg built flying boats starting with the model Hansa Brandenburg GW in 1916. The Austro-Hungarian firm Lona Work began building flying boats starting with the Lona E in 1914 and the later, 1915, Lona L, which was copied widely. Interwar period. 2 Supermarine Southamptons in September 1919. British company Supermarine started operating first flying boat service in the world, from Woolston to Le Havre in France, but it was short-lived. A Curtiss NC-4 became the first aircraft to fly across the Atlantic Ocean in 1919, crossing via the Azores. Of the 4 that made the attempt, only one completed the flight. 14. Before the development of highly reliable aircraft, the ability to land on water was a desirable safety feature for transoceanic travel. 15. In 1923, the first successful commercial flying boat service was introduced with flights to and from the Channel Islands. The British aviation industry was experiencing rapid growth. The government decided that nationalization was necessary and ordered 5 aviation companies to merge to form the state-owned Imperial Airways of London, IAL. IAL became the international flag-carrying British airline, providing flying boat passenger and mail transport links between Britain and South Africa using aircraft such as the short S.8 Calcutta. 16. During the 1920s, the Royal Air Force, RAF, Far East Flight performed a series of showing the flag long-distance formation flights using the newly developed Supermarine Southampton. Perhaps the most notable of these flights was a 43,500 kilometers, 27,000 mi, expedition conducted during 1927 and 1928. It was carried out by 4 Southamptons of the Far East Flight, setting out from Felixstowe via the Mediterranean and India to Singapore. 17. Both the RAF and Supermarine acquired considerable acclaim from these flights, as well as proving that flying boats had evolved to become reliable means of long-distance transport. 18. Flying boats of Adastra Aero SA at Zurich Horn Water Airport, yet Lieberg in the background. 1920. In the 1930s, flying boats made it possible to have regular air transport between the US and Europe, opening up new air travel routes to South America, Africa, and Asia. Foins. Ireland and Boatwood, Newfoundland and Labrador were the termini for mainly transatlantic flights. In areas where there were no airfields for land-based aircraft, flying boats could stop at small island, river, lake or coastal stations to refuel and resupply. The Pan Am Boeing 314 Clipper planes brought exotic destinations like the Far East within reach of air travelers and came to represent the romance of flight. By 1931, mail from Australia was reaching Britain in just 16 days, less than half the time taken by sea. In that year, government tenders on both sides of the world invited applications to run new passenger and mail services between the ends of the British Empire, and Qantas and IAL were successful with a joint bid. A company under combined ownership was then formed, Qantas Empire Airways. The new 10-day service between Rose Bay, New South Wales, near Sydney, and Southampton was such a success with letter writers that before long the volume of mail was exceeding aircraft storage space. A better solution to the problem was sought by the British government during the early 1930s. Holaster specification calling for a new large aircraft capable of carrying up to 24 passengers in spacious comfort along with adequate room for airmail or freight while simultaneously being capable of a cruising speed of 170 miles per hour and a range of at least 700 miles. The capacity for an extended range of 2,000 miles to serve the North Atlantic route was also stipulated. 19. Originally intended for use by IAL, partner Qantas agreed to the initiative and undertook to purchase 6 of the new short S-23C class or Empire flying boats as well. Being ordered from aviation manufacturer Short Brothers, the Empire was reportedly hailed as being one of the world's boldest experiments in aviation, while early skeptics referred to the order less favorably as being a gamble. 19. IAL were so impressed by the Empire that it placed a follow-on order for another 11, when combined with the original order for 28 flying boats. This was the largest single order to have ever been placed for a British civil aircraft at that time. 20. Maya and Mercury. Just before the first transatlantic flight, August 1938, delivering the mail as quickly as possible generated a lot of competition and some innovative designs. One variant of the short Empire flying boats was the strange-looking Maya and Mercury. It was a 4-engined float-plane Mercury, the winged messenger, fixed on top of Maya, a heavily modified short Empire flying boat. 5. The larger Maya took off, carrying the smaller Mercury loaded to a weight greater than it could take off with. This allowed Mercury to carry sufficient fuel for a direct transatlantic flight with the mail. 21. Unfortunately, this was of limited usefulness, and the Mercury had to be returned from America by ship. The Mercury did set a number of distance records before in-flight refueling was adopted. 22. Sir Alan Cobham devised a method of in-flight refueling in the 1930s. In the air, the short Empire could be loaded with more fuel than it could take off with. 5. Short Empire flying boats serving the transatlantic crossing were refueled over Foynes, with the extra fuel load. They could make a direct transatlantic flight. A Handley Page H.P.54 Harrow was used as the fuel tanker. 5. Dornier Duex over a seaport town in the Baltic. 1930. The German Dornier Duex flying boat was noticeably different from its UK and U.S build counterparts. 23. It had wing-like air protrusions from the fuselage, called sponsons, to stabilize it on thutta without the need for wing-mounted outboard floats. This feature was pioneered by Claudius Dornier during the First World War on his Dornier RS I giant flying boat, and perfected on the Dornier Wal in 1924. The enormous Duex was powered by 12 engines and once carried 170 persons as a publicity stunt. 5. It flew to America in 1930. 31, 5. crossing the Atlantic via an indirect route over 9 months. It was the largest flying boat of its time, but was severely underpowered and was limited by a very low operational ceiling. Only 3 were built, with a variety of different engines installed, in an attempt to overcome the lack of power. 2 of these were sold to Italy. The Dornier Wal was easily the greatest commercial success in the history of marine aviation. 24, over 250 were built in Italy, Spain, Japan, the Netherlands and Germany. Numerous airlines operated the Dornier Wal on scheduled passenger and mail services. 25. Wals were used by explorers, for a number of pioneering flights, and by the military in many countries. Though having first flown in 1922, from 1934 to 1938 Wals operated the overwater sectors of the Deutsche Lufthansa South Atlantic Airmail Service. 26. 27. Second World War. PBY Catalina at Naval Air Station Jacksonville, circa 1943. The military value of flying boats was well recognized, and every country bordering on water operated them in a military capacity at the outbreak of the Second World War. Flying boats such as the PBM Mariner patrol bomber, PBY Catalina, Short Sunderland, and Grumman Goose were procured in large numbers. The Sunderland, which was developed in parallel to the civilian Empire flying boat, was one of the most powerful and widely used flying boats throughout the conflict. 28. 29. While Catalinas were one of the most produced ASW of the war, with over 2,661 being produced in the US alone. 30. 31. Flying boats were commonly utilized to conduct various tasks from anti-submarine patrol to air-sea rescue and gunfire spotting for battleships. They would recover downed airmen and operate as scout aircraft over the vast distances of the Pacific Theater and the Atlantic, locating in enemy vessels and sinking numerous submarines. 21. In May 1941, the German battleship Bismarck was discovered by a PBY Catalina flying out of Castle Archdale Flying Boat Base, Lower Loch Earn, Northern Ireland. 32. 33. 34. A flight of Catalinas spotted the Japanese fleet approaching Midway Island, beginning the Battle of Midway. 35. On the 3rd of April, 1940, a single Sunderland operating off Norway was attacked by 6 German Junkers Ju-88 fighters. During the engagement, it shot one down, damaged another until it retreated and drove off the rest. The Germans reputedly nicknamed the Sunderland the Flygens Stålsquin, flying porcupine, due to its defensive firepower. 36. 37. Sunderlands in the Mediterranean theater proved themselves on multiple high-profile occasions, flying many evacuation missions during the German seizure of Crete, carrying as many as 82 passengers. One Sunderland flew the reconnaissance mission to observe the Italian fleet at anchor in Taranto before the famous Royal Navy Fleet Air Arms torpedo attack on 11 November 1940. 38. The prototype BV-238V1 in June 1944. The largest flying boat of the war was the Blohm & Voss BV-238, which was also the heaviest plane to fly during the Second World War and the largest aircraft built and flown by any of the Axis powers. Only the first prototype ever flew, commencing flight trials in April 1944. 39. Months later, it was strafed and partially sunk while moored on Lake Sco, to the east of Hamburg. It never returned to flight, instead being intentionally sunk in deep water after the end of the conflict. 40. Kawanishi H-8K, 1941-1945. The Imperial Japanese Navy operated what has been often described as the best flying boat of the conflict, the Kawanishi H-8K. 41. 42. 43. Its design was based upon its immediate predecessor, the Kawanishi H-6K. but was a considerably larger and longer-ranged aircraft designed at the request of the Navy just prior to the outbreak of War. 44-45. On the night of the 4th of March, 1942, 2H-8KS conducted the second raid on Pearl Harbor, refueling en route by submarine at French frigate shoals in order to achieve the necessary range. Poor visibility caused this attack on Pearl Harbor to fail to accomplish any significant damage. 46-47, an improved H-8K2 variant of the type, featuring extremely heavy defensive armament, was also introduced. 48. In November 1939, IAL was restructured into 3 separate companies: British European Airways, British Overseas Airways Corporation, BORC, and British South American Airways, which merged with BOAS in 1949, with the change being made official on the 1st of April 1940. BORC continued to operate flying boat services from the slightly safer confines of Pearl Harbor during wartime, returning to Southampton in 1947. 5. When Italy entered the war in June 1940, the Mediterranean was closed to Allied planes, and BOAC and Qantas operated the horseshoe route between Durban and Sydney using short Empire flying boats. 49. The Martin Company produced the prototype XPB-2M Mars based on their PBM Mariner patrol bomber, with flight tests between 1941 and 1943. The Mars was converted by the Navy into a transport aircraft designated the XPB-2M-1R. Satisfied with the performance, 20 of the modified JRM-1 Mars were ordered. The first of the 5 production Mars flying boats entered service, ferrying cargo to Hawaii and the Pacific Islands on the 23rd of January 1944. 50. Following the end of the conflict, the Navy opted to scale back their order, buying only the 5 aircraft. The 5 Mars were completed, and the last delivered in 1947. 51. Post-war. Hughes H-4 Hercules. After the end of the Second World War, the use of flying boats rapidly declined for several reasons. The ability to land on water became less of an advantage owing to the considerable increase in number and length of land-based runways during the conflict. Furthermore, the commercial competitiveness of flying boats diminished, as their design compromised aerodynamic efficiency and speed in order to accommodate waterborne takeoff and landing. New land-based airliners such as the Lockheed Constellation and Douglas DC-4 were developed with comparable reliability, speed and long range. The new land planes were relatively easy to fly, and did not require the extensive pilot training programs mandated for seaplane operations. One of the 314's most experienced pilots said, "We were indeed glad to change to DC-4s, and I argue daily for eliminating all flying boats." The Saunders Row SR.A/1 land planes were much safer. No one in the operations department had any idea of the hazards of flying boat operations. The main problem now was lack of the very high level of experience and competence required of seaplane pilots. 52. The Hughes H-4 Hercules, in development in the US during the year, was even larger than the BV-238, but it did not fly until 1947. The Spruce Goose, as the 180-ton H-4 was nicknamed, was the largest flying boat ever to fly. Carried out during Senate hearings into Hughes' use of government funds on its construction, the short hop of about a mile at 70 feet above the water by the Flying Lumberyard was claimed by Hughes as the H-4's vindication. 53-54. Cutbacks in expenditure after the war and the disappearance of its intended mission as a transatlantic transport left the H-4 with no purpose. Despite never flying again, a full-time crew of 300 workers maintained the H-4 in a flight-worthy condition in a climate-controlled hangar up until Hughes' death in 1976. 55-56. In early 1944, the British Air Ministry issued a contract for the production of a small jet-powered flying boat, the Saunders Roe SR.A/1, that was intended for use as an air defense aircraft optimized for use in the Pacific Theater. 57. By adopting jet propulsion for the